You think you know Hera. You are wrong. The jealous wife, the obsessive avenger, the goddess who hounded Heracles, destroyed Semele, and tormented Io. That is the image 2.5 millennia of storytelling have handed us. But what if that image is a distortion, a political rewriting of a figure far more ancient and far more powerful? Today, we are going to dismantle it, piece by piece, with the primary sources and the scholarship in hand. What you are about to see is the myth as tradition has told it. What follows is the truth beneath it.
Thunder tore through the sky of Olympus, not a thunder of joy, but a roar of divine fury. Seated upon her golden throne, an ivory scepter gripped in one hand, and a regal diadem crowning her brow, Hera, queen of the gods, felt the venom of yet another betrayal coursing through her veins. Her eyes, large and majestic, carrying the epithet Homer would give her, boôpis, the ox-eyed, the wide-eyed, burned with an ancient flame. A wrath that was not mere jealousy, but the fierce defense of a violated order, of a broken covenant.
What scene captures the full fury of Hera's wrath, and what does it really mean? Zeus, king of the cosmos, had once again surrendered to earthly desire. A new liaison, a new illegitimate child on the horizon, and Hera, seated on her golden throne, the ivory scepter in her hand, was watching. She was not a goddess who wept in silence. Her wrath was not jealousy in any sense a modern viewer might recognize. It was something colder, more structural, the fierce defense of a violated order, of a covenant broken again and again by the very God who was supposed to uphold it. This is the image that Homer hands us in the Iliad, a Hera whose anger is ancient, whose eyes, described with the epithet boôpis, carry the weight of a sacred tradition that predates Olympus itself.
3 victims, 3 myths, but is this really the full picture of who Hera is? Remember Semele, consumed by divine flames, or Io, transformed into a heifer and tormented by a ceaseless gadfly, and the mighty Heracles, persecuted from the cradle, driven to superhuman labors by his relentless enemy. Every tale of Zeus and his conquests was a fresh affront, a new scar upon the queen's soul, and every reaction of hers was a warning. Order, legitimacy, the nomos itself had to be defended, even at the cost of infinite suffering. Imposing and terrible, her figure loomed over the pantheon, an eternal symbol of power and of a severe, often misunderstood, yet inescapable justice. But here is the question that changes everything. Is any of this actually in the sources? What we have just seen is the version of Hera that popular tradition has preserved and amplified across centuries. Art, literature, cinema, and retelling after retelling. The jealous queen, the implacable avenger. But when we go back to the primary sources, Homer, Hesiod, Pindar, Pausanias, Strabo, Callimachus, and when we read what the best classical scholarship of the last 40 years actually argues, something very different emerges. This is where rigorous historical analysis and archaeological evidence collide with the myth we thought we knew. Let's find out what the sources actually say.
The core. In-depth academic analysis. Analysis of primary sources. Chronological breakdown. Homer gives us the earliest portrait of Hera, but what does he actually say, and why does the epithet he uses matter so much? But here is what Homer reveals that popular tradition deliberately obscured.
The earliest and most influential literary attestations of Hera are found in the works of Homer, conventionally dated to the 8th century BC. In both the Iliad and the Odyssey, Hera appears as the consort of Zeus, yet her figure is far too complex to be reduced to that role alone. She is frequently addressed by the epithet boôpis, commonly rendered as ox-eyed or wide-eyed. Far from being derogatory, this epithet evokes majesty, grandeur, and an archaic link to bovine symbolism. The cow was a sacred animal across many Indo-European cultures and a cipher for fertility and abundance. The jealousy Hera displays towards Zeus's extramarital liaisons is a recurrent motif, but, as we shall see, it is not a simple personal emotion. It is rather a defense of order and legitimacy. A telling example appears in Iliad 1, lines 539 to 540. Was phato, te de uti charizomeni potnia heri, histo, ke uk ephthi koteusa. So he spoke, but the venerable Hera, not at all appeased, sat, and was not slow to become wrathful. Even in her anger, this passage may be read as the defense of a higher principle of cosmic and social order.
Hesiod goes further, to the very birth of the gods. What does the Theogony reveal about Hera's place in the cosmic order? Every scholar who has touched this question has arrived at the same unsettling conclusion. Hesiod, a near contemporary of Homer, 8th–7th century BC, provides a cosmogonic framework for Hera in the Theogony. Here she is identified as one of the daughters of Cronus and Rhea, and thus both sister and wife of Zeus. The Theogony situates her among the principal consorts of the king of the gods, helping to define her position within the Olympian hierarchy as it was crystallizing during that period. Although Hesiod reinforces the image of Hera as consort, his work is indispensable for understanding the structure of the divine family and the emerging order of the pantheon.
Pindar calls her Hera Parthenos, Hera the Virgin. In a married goddess, what does that epithet actually mean? And here is the paradox that Pindar could not explain without later scholarship's evidence. Writing in the 5th century BC, Pindar includes significant cultic references to Hera in his Olympian odes, deploying the revealing epithet Hera Parthenos, Hera the Virgin. This epithet is crucial. It points to an original autonomy not defined by marital status. Virgin here need not imply chastity. Rather, it connotes self-sufficiency and non-subjugation, suggesting that Hera once occupied a pre-Olympian role as a powerful, independent deity prior to her assimilation into the pantheon as the wife of Zeus.
Strabo and Pausanias are not mythographers, they are geographers and travelers. So why do their accounts of the Argive Heraion tell us more about Hera's real power than almost any myth? But here is what Strabo and Pausanias reveal that earlier mythographers deliberately obscured. Strabo, writing between the 1st century BC and the 1st century AD, records in his geography the strategic positioning of the Argive Heraion, sited deliberately between Argos and Mycenae. This was no accident. It reflected Hera's role as a protective deity of territorial boundaries. Several centuries later, Pausanias, in his description of Greece, 2nd century AD, provides meticulous descriptions of Hera's sanctuaries, above all the Heraion of Argos, Book 2, 17.5 and 8.46.3. His testimony is invaluable for reconstructing the rites, architecture, and centrality of Hera's cult in the life of the Greek polis, revealing a role that extended far beyond that of Zeus's consort.
Before Hera had a face, she was a plank of wood. What do Aethlios and Callimachus tell us about the origins of her cult on Samos, and why does it change everything? Every scholar who has touched this question has arrived at the same unsettling conclusion. The earliest evidence for Hera's cult image in Samos offers particularly illuminating insights. The local historian Aethlios, c. 500 BC, recorded that the image of the Samian Hera was originally a plank of wood, which later assumed a human form. This tradition is corroborated by Callimachus in the 3rd century BC, who knew of the uncut plank, ankon, before Greek settlers carved the goddess into anthropomorphic shape. These references point to an aniconic or pre-anthropomorphic origin of Hera's cult on Samos, suggesting very deep roots and a connection to nature or fertility deities that predates her full integration into the Olympian system. If you are finding this analysis valuable, your support through a like and subscription allows me to continue research at this level.
Academic analysis and interpretation. Analysis of secondary sources. The scholarly debate. Walter Burkert's Greek Religion is one of the foundational texts of classical scholarship. What does he say about Hera that popular mythology has completely erased? And here is the paradox that earlier interpretations could not explain without Burkert's evidence. Walter Burkert, in his landmark study, Greek Religion, 1985, draws a clear distinction between the archaic and Olympian strata of Greek religious thought. Burkert foregrounds Hera's pre-Olympian identity as a sovereign deity, underlining her centrality in the cults of Argos and Samos. In his reading, the image of the jealous wife was a later mythological overlay that obscured her original function as a great goddess, intimately linked to fertility, royalty, and the protection of the community. This interpretive framework is essential for dismantling the modern, reductive view of the goddess.
J.C. Wright looks at the stones of the Argive Heraion and reads politics. What does the architecture of a sanctuary reveal about the function of a goddess? But here is what J.C. Wright reveals that traditional archaeological readings deliberately obscured. J.C. Wright, in his study The Old Temple Terrace at the Argive Heraion and the Early Cult of Hera in the Argolid, 1982, analyzes the architecture of the Argive Heraion, focusing especially on its Mycenaean-style terrace. Wright interprets this architectural choice as a deliberate act of legitimization. By evoking the prestigious Mycenaean past, the sanctuary anchored communal identity and reinforced political authority. This points to Hera as not merely a religious figure, but a political and social symbol, whose veneration was instrumental to the construction of Argive identity and the legitimation of power.
Neta Aloni-Ronen challenges the dominant reading of the Argive Heraion. If the sanctuary was not a tool of Argive expansion, what was it? And what does that say about Hera's real political function? Every scholar who has touched this question has arrived at the same unsettling conclusion. Neta Aloni-Ronen, in her article Hera and the Formation of Aristocratic Collective Identity, 1997, reads the Argive Heraion not as an instrument of Argive territorial expansion, but rather as a focal point of cooperation and integration among the aristocratic communities of the wider region. She proposes Hera as a pan-regional, unifying deity whose influence transcended the borders of any single polis. This interpretation challenges more expansionist readings and underscores Hera's capacity to function as a catalyst for social and political cohesion.
Olaya Fernández Guerrero asks a deceptively simple question in her 2022 study, Is Hera Teleia really the perfect wife? Or is that the most misleading epithet in all of Greek religion? And here is the paradox that earlier interpretations could not explain without Fernández Guerrero's evidence. Olaya Fernández Guerrero in Hera the Perfect Wife, Features and Paradoxes of the Greek Goddess of Marriage, explores the paradox between the image of Hera as Hera Teleia, the perfect wife, and her origins as an unmarried great goddess intrinsically bound to nature and fertility. The author challenges the conventional reading of Hera's jealousy as mere emotional pique, arguing instead that the epithet teleia points to the fulfillment of social order through marriage, not to domestic contentment. Her reactions constitute a structural defense of that order, and her jealousy is best understood as a mythological projection of her function as guarantor of the nomos and legitimacy, a force protecting social stability and rightful succession against the chaos introduced by Zeus's infidelities. Kyrieleis excavates the Heraion of Samos and finds crocodile bones and model ships among the votive offerings. What do these objects tell us about the goddess who received them and the world she presided over? But here is what Kyrieleis reveals that traditional archaeological readings deliberately obscured. H. Kyrieleis in The Heraion at Samos in 2004 highlights the archaeological importance of the sanctuary, especially the Temple of Roikos and its connection to the period of tyranny, most notably that of Polycrates. The monumentality of the precinct reflected the island's power and wealth, while the presence of exotic votives, fragments of crocodiles and antelopes, model ships, attests to Hera's role as protectress of maritime trade and a symbol of Samian power.
So who is Hera, really? The sources have spoken. It is time to answer. And here is what 2.5 millennia of distortion could not, in the end, conceal. The evidence taken together points in one direction. Homer's boôpis, majestic, archaic, sovereign, is not the portrait of a jealous wife. It is the portrait of a goddess whose wrath is structural, the defense of a cosmic covenant against the god who was supposed to uphold it. Hesiod places her at the apex of the divine genealogy. Pindar calls her Parthenos, autonomous, self-sufficient, answerable to no marital contract. And Strabo and Pausanias reveal a sanctuary positioned with deliberate political intent between two poli, functioning as the axis of a regional identity. And Callimachus and Aethlios carry us back further still, to a plank of uncut wood, an aniconic image, predating anthropomorphism, predating the Olympian system itself.
The secondary scholarship confirms what the primary sources already suggest. Burkert sees through the Olympian overlay to the pre-Olympian great goddess beneath, intimately connected to fertility, royalty, and communal protection. Wright reads the Mycenaean architecture of the Argive Heraion as an act of political legitimation, anchoring Argive identity in a prestigious past. Aloni-Ronen shows that the sanctuary was not a tool of territorial expansion, but a focal point of aristocratic cohesion across the wider region. And Fernández Guerrero dismantles the conventional reading of Hera Teleia. The perfect wife is not domestically content. She is the structural guarantor of nomos, of legitimate succession, of the social order that Zeus's infidelities continuously threaten. And Kyrieleis' excavations at Samos, with their crocodile bones and model ships among the votive deposits, reveal a goddess who presided over maritime trade and the expanding power of an island at the height of its influence.
None of this adds up to a jealous wife. It adds up to something far older and far more powerful, a deity of sovereignty, of legitimacy, of the cosmic contract that holds civilization together. The image of the vengeful, obsessive queen was not invented by Hera. It was invented by the mythographers and by the political culture that needed them, who found it easier to write the enforcement of order as jealousy than to acknowledge it as justice, to diminish a goddess rather than confront the power she represented.
We began with a question. Do you think you know Hera? Now you do. If the content pleased you, I invite you to like it, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next videos.